So my guest today is Willair St, who's a mentor of mine, coach of mine, friend of mine, OG of mine, brother of mine. I look up to this guy for a long, long time, man. First time I met him, I was in a training and he was conducting the training. And I went up to him afterwards. I was like, hey, man, I'm working on some things. And when I get everything together, I'm going to reach out to you. And he was like, sure, anytime, reach out to me. And I did. And we connect. Pretty much I text with Willair daily. Um, and we meet. He mentors. He coaches me. So I'm grateful to have this conversation with you, man. A lot of times we have conversations, and I'm like, man, I wish we recorded this.
Mhm.
So this time we get to kind of live up to the billing and record one of
Fantastic.
these. Yeah, man. So Willair, I'm not gonna do any kind of formal introduction, man. Through the conversation, people will get to know you. So I want
Mhm.
you to tell us, where were you born? When did you move to America? What were your first impressions when you got to America?
Sure. I was born in a small town in Haiti called Bassin Bleu or Blue Basin. We
Mm,
were that no traffic light, um, just humble, small town kind of thing. And I was lucky. I'm the first born of these two amazing people. And the town when I was born in, my maternal grandparents were there in that town. So my father moved into that town, met my wife, and married her.
mm,
And my grandfather is one of those elders where they refer to his nickname is Father blank, 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 like kind of his name.
mm-hmm,
And my maternal grandmother was a merchant who traveled daily to different places to sell certain things she had that people needed, from food to clothes to household items. She would get on a donkey every morning and travel to different places where they had markets during the day to do her thing. While my maternal grandfather would go to his farm. He had about 6 or 7 pieces of land throughout the region where he would go every morning to tend to his quote unquote agricultural quote unquote products.
mm-hmm,
And my father was the head of police in the town, believe it or not.
mm,
And my mother, and he was a tailor as well. And my mother was a seamstress. And we
mm,
had a grocery store in the house. I was very protected
mm-hmm.
in that environment. And I also was lucky to have one of my cousins who was about 8 or 10 years older than me, maybe a little bit older, because eventually, when he became a teenager, he was an apprentice under both my mother and my father, who were
Mm.
both tailor and seamstress, and they had an apprenticeship in the house. So in one room,
Nice.
there was a store. In another large room, there was kind of a tailoring shop where people would bring clothes or to be sewn, and they had my cousin and at least one other person as their apprentice learning under them. And so I was born in that kind of setting. My father highly respected, and some would say feared. My
Mm,
mother was respected because of who her father was and who her mother was.
mm-hmm.
There were people you can go to get what you need. You get advice from my grandfather, and you will get loan, which some of them never got paid back from my grandmother because she had the wherewithal to do that for people. So, but at the age of 6, they wanted me to have a better education than was available in Blue Basin. So they
Mm-hmm.
sent me to Port-au-Père, which is the nearest kind of province of Haiti. That's
Mm-hmm.
the northwest of Haiti, where I
Mm-hmm.
went to a Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
And so my education began there per se in a
Mm-hmm.
very high level. I was already well advanced in math, well advanced in my communication. I knew my alphabet, was
Mm-hmm.
already spelling words. So I was prepared. But when I went
Mm-hmm.
to that Catholic school, I was definitely, quote unquote, receiving enhanced education that most did not have access to. So I was lucky that
Nice.
way.
Nice, nice, nice.
It's important to know that my father then became a refugee and left
Mm,
Haiti when I was 8 years old. And that was a little dramatic and traumatic for both my mom and the family. But
mm-hmm.
because she was in her hometown with her mother and her father and a
Mm-hmm.
host of cousins, aunties, and uncles, so she was supported well.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that time, I was still away in school, and I would come home only on large holidays or on winter or summer break. But I had two sisters who were born who she was taking care of, along with all the entire village who loved her and nurtured her.
Mm.
And then, literally 3 years later, my father settled in New York, and then she eventually sent for her.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to Port-au-Prince, where I started what we call the beginning of the secondary school in the
Mm-hmm.
capital. And there's a book by Edwidge Dantica. She's a famous Haitian writer. You should look her up for those who are
Mm-hmm.
listening to this. She has an amazing book called
Absolutely.
Crick Crack, Do Break Her. She's amazing.
Yep.
And we both experienced the same thing where our parents left us in Haiti behind with
Mm-hmm.
elders who would take care of us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a name for that. Like some people call it left behind, but that's not the
Mm-hmm.
way we saw it. Although we miss our parents, but we knew what the goal was.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1973, at the age of 13, my parents sent for me and my three siblings who were born at that point, because two of my sisters were born in Haiti, just like I was. One
Mm-hmm.
of them was born in the United States
Mm-hmm.
in 71, but they sent her back to Haiti to be nurtured. And
Mm-hmm.
then we all then, four of us came to New York in 1973 at the age of 13. That was June 1973. I landed in New York.
Nice.
Yeah, June 1973. I remember it now.
Yeah.
And for those who are separated from their parents for a minute or two, I understand because I was my father's right and left eyes. So when he left Haiti, he was hurt, I was hurt. So
Mm-hmm.
when I landed at JFK and went out of the plane, he was standing there waiting for me. My father was only 5'9", 5'10", but he was a boxer, military guy, strong. So he gave me the strongest hug ever. I thought he was going to break my back. That's how much love he
Mm-hmm.
was. He was crying, seeing me.
Yeah.
And so my life started in the United States that way.
Yeah.
Um, when we got there, he made sure that he had bought a house. So working in a garment district in New York City, my mother was there as well. They were able to save enough to actually bought a house in Brooklyn to make sure so that we had a place that was comfortable, that was safe. Um, we grew up in a neighborhood that was totally new. Um, it's not a bragging thing. I'm not saying I'm proud of this, but we were one of the first Black family in the
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood. There
Mm-hmm.
were two people across the street. We became friends to family. Eventually, the neighborhood got more and more, quote unquote, Black and brown as things
Mm-hmm.
happen, where white flight happens in any
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood in the United States. And grew up going to the Catholic church next nearby, started doing a lot of leadership work. But I was lucky because as I landed in New York in June 1973, in September, I walked right into Tilden High School and knew no English whatsoever.
Mm.
Because in Haiti, you go to school, you at the time you had to learn in French. Now
Mm-hmm.
you're a student, you can actually speak Creole, but of course,
Mm-hmm.
learn Creole and French in school.
Yep.
But back then, you were expected to speak in Creole, in French, although at
Mm-hmm.
home I wasn't speaking French.
Mm-hmm.
But then just the challenge of having to become fluent in French, I did not know any other language. So when I landed in Tilden, my first day, that September after Labor Day, I had to learn English and learn and get into high school with all these 13, 14, 15-year-old. Imagine that. You can close your eyes and imagine this young man at 13. I was going to turn 14 that following October, October 1973, and walking to Tilden and having to adjust culturally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Physically, emotionally, to reacquainted with my parents and having to adjust to this new environment,
Yeah.
right? And there we often talk about education, what makes one successful or not successful, what are the resources that are available to you. I say I
Mm-hmm.
was lucky in one sense because I had a couple of people in Tilden, in Samuel J. Tilden,
Mm-hmm.
who I do not know if they love me, but they showed me love.
Nice.
Um, One of them was the head of the science department. His name was Jerry Hearing. And
Mm-hmm.
we became friends, not just professor or teacher, student. we became friends because of this early on relationship. He gravitated to me as I gravitated to him. His office was a place I could always go to if I needed to sit somewhere, run away, or if I was frustrated. His office was always available to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my guidance counselor was racist.
Mm-hmm.
However, he protected me from her racism and
Mm-hmm.
protected me so I could succeed. And I took on very quickly because I also made friends who were Haitian, but were born in the United States.
Right.
So they speak Creole just like I did, which was
Mm-hmm.
great. We were
Mm-hmm.
more or less in the same neighborhood, which was
Mm-hmm.
great. But they
Mm-hmm.
were much more advanced than I was in the culture and the environment because they went to primary school, middle school, and I just happened to fall in the midst with these five amazing young men.
Nice.
So I was lucky. Um, and to the point where our families became connected because we were connected. And so, as a young man, 14, 15 years old, you need some level of freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some little mischiefs. So I can always tell my parents, I'm going to see Jack, or I'm going to see Charles, I'm
Yeah.
going to see so and so. And they would say, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Because it's only 3, 4 blocks away. You're not going
Yeah.
far. Nothing can happen. And I know you're protected. In school, there was a lot of competition. They competed against one another, but they knew that I was new. So then there was not a competition with me because, in fact, they were looking out for me. And so I took my ESL class. My first year
Mm-hmm.
was all ESL. So I
Yeah.
was doing history, I was doing English, I was doing science, I was doing all those classes, but in an ESL version, and I had an
Mm-hmm.
ESL class as well to help me learn English.
Right. Right.
um, Jerry Hearing again was ever present because
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Hearing, let me say, spoke a little Creole, spoke
Mm-hmm.
French, Spanish, and German.
Mm.
And he had, again, had an interest in this young man, right?
Yes.
And so in science, I was excelling in science. Science came natural to me. Science came
Mm-hmm.
easy to me. So that
Mm-hmm.
made him a lot closer to me since he was the head of the science department,
Nice.
right? So right away, to make me feel comfortable, he talked to my parents, and I was able to stay in his office
Mm-hmm.
and do some kind of work study so I could help him with papers and filing things in the cabinet or so I became a big man in school because if you wanted to send a message to another colleague, another department, it says,
Yeah.
Willair, why don't you go to so-and-so's office on the third floor, take
Yeah.
that to them. So that's also a way for me to get to know all the teachers
Yeah.
or the department heads. So I became this little Haitian kid, barely learning and talking in English, but since Jerry Hill trusted him and liked him, we have to treat him well. So in that way, I was lucky. And which is why I give back as soon as I was able to, because I know a lot of young people did not experience what I had.
Yeah.
The typing teacher liked me,
Mm-hmm.
and so did the co-ed teacher. And the co-ed
Mm-hmm.
co-op teacher is someone who can help you get part-time job if you needed it.
Right. Right.
Because Jerry Hill was kind of one of those very flamboyant kind of guy who traveled the world, spoke multiple language, and was a
Mm-hmm.
flirter. So both
Yeah.
these are women that he had kind of social interaction with. So
Yeah.
because he liked me, they
Yeah.
liked me. So
Right. Right. Right.
so I started kind of making connection with people that were
Yeah.
connected to him. So because I was
Nice.
connected to him, I was connected to them.
Right.
Um, and also the gym teacher, PE teachers like me because I love
Mm-hmm.
sports.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that I was very agile in sports, not only I could play soccer, but then that's what handball came easy.
Mm-hmm.
Basketball was not so weird.
Yeah.
Even learning how to throw a football was not necessarily clumsy because again, I was agile, I was athletic because I
Yeah.
could play soccer and volleyball. So those gym teachers saw me and say, "Hey, he may not speak any English, but you know, we like him. He's not
Yeah.
lazy. He
Yeah.
doesn't have 2 left foot.
Yeah.
He knows his way around a sporting
Yeah.
environment. So all those things help me. Now, since this is an educational setting, I need
Mm-hmm.
to make this 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know where I got it from, but I know that my father, especially, my mother
Mm-hmm.
was the quiet one, but my father loudly said, "You are the oldest at the time." My second youngest brother was born in 75. So
Mm.
by the time I became a junior, I heard that you had 3 sisters and our brother coming.
Mm-hmm.
You have to set an example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in his most Creole and military voice, you cannot
Yeah.
fail, you cannot F up
Yeah.
because they're watching you. You
Mm-hmm.
have to be the example.
Right.
So that was the pressure on that 14, 15-year-old young man early on in New York,
Yeah.
finding my
Yeah.
ways, wanting to do what my boys were doing, right?
Yeah.
And so what I did is I did what was easy for me, which is focus on education. So when I
Mm-hmm.
get home in the afternoon, I walk home with the boys. That's one way of getting more English, of starting to, look at the young ladies and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I got home though, away from my friends, luckily I was lucky enough to have a room by myself, although it was like a closet, but it was my room. I got
Mm-hmm.
into Jet magazine, I got into
Mm-hmm.
Ebony, I got
Mm-hmm.
into all the magazines so I can read and see pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I started listening to the radio, my
Mm-hmm.
little AM FM radio that was on the windowsill,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
and listening to sports.
Mm-hmm.
There's a legend in the sports world called Art Russ, R-U-S-S Jr. He
Mm-hmm.
used to be a boxing announcer. He talked about all
Mm-hmm.
sports since I love sports. So by
Mm-hmm.
listening to sports on the radio, I was learning
Mm-hmm.
English. By
Mm-hmm.
reading Ebony, by reading Jet, by
Mm-hmm.
reading Sport Illustrated, I
Mm-hmm.
started learning English by reading not as many books I should have had, but definitely a whole lot of magazines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the one thing my mother supported. I got into subscription. She wasn't making much money, but whenever the bill came, she paid and kept them coming.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
on Saturday and Sunday, of course, I would watch Soul Train. I would
Mm-hmm.
watch, I watch all the other shows that were kind of entertainment related,
Yeah.
listening to movies, watching talk shows like Merv Griffin, so that I
Mm-hmm.
could learn the language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then in church, luckily, although there was a Haitian mass, once again, because I'm bringing in the church in Haiti,
Mm-hmm.
I was connected to the priest. So then I was part of the church environment where, again, it helped me with the language. So there's a lot I
Mm-hmm.
did outside of the school that
Mm-hmm.
helped me in my English and my learning
Yeah.
the language and
Yeah.
understanding the culture.
Yeah. No, no, I love that, man. And I love your story because I can relate to it, right? So this is the thing. I'm gonna frame this and I'm gonna just hand it over to you. What I love about your story is that it's a story of community. So you talk about,
Mhm.
growing up, having your grandparents, having your parents are, essentially business owners, and not just business owners, they had multiple businesses they were running, right? So you got to witness all this as a child, your love of sports, your love of science. So you were kind of nurtured and cultured and supported in a way that you had various interests
Mhm.
that you could explore freely, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
without any restriction. So
Mhm.
what I want you to tell me is how did having that grounding as a child like prepare you to explore your future career options, as a teenager?
Great. In fact, that's what I was going to get to next.
Mm-hmm.
Just yesterday and Wednesday, I'm literally as a consultant on staff at GWU.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the faculty director for the executive leadership program where we help leaders in the district government become stronger leaders. We
Mm-hmm.
also get to coach leaders at ATF and at FEMA. So I'm part of
Mm-hmm.
that world. But I
Nice.
was prepared for that when I was a teenager. So here's the
Mm-hmm.
story. And I know we talked about this, Derek, and you love this. At 15 years old, I came home one afternoon, and my sister, who was 11, because we
Mm-hmm.
each 4 years apart, and the
Mm-hmm.
one that was 7 came and tell their parents that, hey, our parents that my teachers want you to come to school.
Mm-hmm.
My father quickly says, I go to work every morning at 6:30, 7 o'clock. Your mother go to school, work with me at 6:30, 7 o'clock. We cannot go to school unless you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister says, no, we're not in trouble. They just want you to come to school. Parent
Mm-hmm.
teachers night, right?
Mm-hmm.
Guess who got to go to represent my parents? I did.
Yep.
So I walked into my sister's school. Luckily, it was only 4 blocks from the school,
Mm-hmm.
from the house. So I went
Mm-hmm.
there with them at 6:30, 7 o'clock. And they said, why are you here? Well, my parents not only do not, and that's kind of a myth because they did speak enough English. They're
Mm-hmm.
not able to communicate in English.
Mm-hmm.
And they both work and got home late. I'm responsible to come and talk to you. And
Yeah.
whatever you share with me, I'll take back.
Yeah.
That was a learning. having to negotiate not only
Mm-hmm.
my way to my
Mm-hmm.
educational challenges at Children High School,
Mm-hmm.
now I'm supporting my sisters because
Mm-hmm.
my parents, based on their cultural upbringing in Haiti,
Mm-hmm.
did not see their role in going to school to talk to a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Either my kids were doing well or not doing well,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all I need to know. But coming to
Right.
school, if I'm doing what I need to do as a parent at home, teachers, you do what you need to do at school for my kids. That's all I need to know
Mm-hmm.
about. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a learning for me. And it allowed me to be more mature than
Mm-hmm.
most my age. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, my boys, the guys who grew up with, they didn't have to do that because
Right.
their parents already were acculturate to the fact that no, we have to go to school, we have to talk to
Mm-hmm.
the teachers, or you know. But my parents like, no, this is not what we do,
Yeah.
you know. And so I took on that role.
Yeah.
And weird enough, early on, as I became a junior and a senior, I started playing that role for other young people
Mm-hmm.
that were in the community who had the
Mm-hmm.
same kind of environment that I did, where their parents were not didn't see a role for them to play in school. As long as they send their children to school and prepare them to go to school, they
Mm-hmm.
didn't need to engage with the teachers themselves. Teachers would do what they need to do as educators, and we do what we need to do as parents.
Yep.
And so a lot of the parents would talk to me and say, well, how can you help me? Or how can you talk to my daughter? How can you talk to my son? So that, and so I started playing that role, kind of
Mm-hmm.
an intervener, a connector, a support.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of prepared me because my first real grown up position was working in a high school,
Mm-hmm.
supporting young people who
Yep.
were somewhat challenged as far as being connected to the educational process. And
Mm-hmm.
because I understand how that can easily happen. And
Right.
so I was prepared to support and play in that role from the time myself I was in high school and
Mm-hmm.
undergrad and transitioned to the
Mm-hmm.
process. So it helped me, prepared me for what I
Yeah.
was going to experience years later as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I love that, right? So I don't know if you picked up on this, but there's a framework that I'm following. So we started off with the first P, which was your personal story, right? So now we're
Mhm,
getting into the professional realm, the second
mhm,
P, right? And
mhm,
then we're going to wrap it up with the third P, which is your role as a parent,
mhm,
right? So,
mhm,
so professionally, I know you've told me a lot of stories about when you started off working, working in the schools, working with young people. How did you get clarity on exactly what you want to do? Because a lot of the skills that you're actually utilizing in your job, in your profession as you're starting off, this was already embedded in you from early on. You know what I
mhm.
mean? So the independence was there, the advocacy was there, the ambition was there. And now you're kind of seeing it play out as you grow as a professional. So tell me, how did you figure out or get to, your first set of jobs where you're like, hey, this is actually something that I can utilize my skill set into.
Actually, what's funny about it is the work you do at UDC,
Hmm.
it's kind of relevant in the story because as I came back and knowing that I wanted to start working after my education, I was referred to, I believe at the time they called it, it was it was TAP. I have to get back to
Hmm.
you as far as what TAP stood for back then.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it was kind of a workforce center where
Hmm.
this organization that was one of the largest nonprofit in New York City, maybe in the United States,
Yeah.
they were supporting people in the community. But there was an individual there that day who wanted to hire someone to support an educational program in a high school where
Hmm.
students were experiencing truancy or long-term absences, and they wanted to change that trajectory of their educational journey.
Hmm.
And when I walked in, we just had a conversation. And he hired me because of my experience as a teenager while I
Hmm.
was an undergrad, because of the work I
Hmm.
did in the community. Because I
Yep.
was community focused, community
Hmm.
organizer, community
Hmm.
advocate. He learned about what I did. He actually understood my leadership skills. I can call it that now. I forgot what the word he used. It says,
Mm-hmm.
you are the right person who can actually step into that school and do what
Mm-hmm.
we believe need to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I walked into Eastern District High School in August 1983,
Mm-hmm.
he walked me into the principal's office, Sonia Rivera, and said, Mr. Rivera, this is Willair St. He's going to actually help you with the challenges you face with the students you want to get back to school with better attendance, academic outcome, and hopefully graduate in time to transition.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there listening to all of this. He didn't tell me any of this before we walk into the school. He just said, you
Right.
hired, and I'm
Yeah.
going to introduce you to the principal.
Yeah.
And I remember Sonia Rivera, I said, okay, young man, I do not know you, but if Mel Betty bring you here from FEGS, Federation of
Mm-hmm.
Employment Guidance Services, you must be the
Mm-hmm.
right person for the position. And she slid a big, thick kind of data sheet in front of me with the
Mm-hmm.
name of 500 plus students.
Mm-hmm.
It says, what you can do for me is find a way to bring these 500 students back to regular attendance.
Mm-hmm.
If you can do that,
Uh-huh.
I'd be thankful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and the shocker was, as we left the office to go down to where my office would be, what I saw, helter skelter, big space, open space. Eventually, there were three nonprofit that shared a large space, but there was
Mm-hmm.
a corner that was mine because I got there first. I looked at a corner that had windows and whatever.
Yeah.
Figured,
Yeah.
we're going to use this part of the office. And then the person who's the head of the school support effort we're doing as part of the organization said, well, there are three desks. I said, yeah. Well, he said, you get to choose one. I said, okay, this is
Mm-hmm.
my desk. Okay. And what happened to the other two? He said, well, you get to hire two more people to work with you.
Okay.
So they were at 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
This guy told me that I get to hire two more people to work with me to
Right.
make this possible.
Yeah.
So talk about deer in the headlight and kind of,
Yeah.
okay, I've never had to hire anybody before. I never had
Mm-hmm.
to interview someone before, literally in that
Yep.
context.
Yep.
And so that was my introduction professionally to leadership
Yeah.
and to basically being responsible and
Yeah.
accountable to
Yeah.
deliver an outcome. All
Yeah.
right. So the lucky thing again for me being part of a community, this was the latest of school or schools in their portfolio, but there
Mm-hmm.
were another 15 schools that organization was supporting in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to meet the leaders that were supporting four of the schools not far from my school.
Mm-hmm.
And so the one thing, even again, going still in high school in 1973, I
Mm-hmm.
knew how to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a clear introvert, but I
Yeah.
know how to connect with people and
Yeah.
I know how to meet with people and how to
Yeah.
nurture relationship.
Absolutely.
So exactly. So I nurture relationship with the people leading those other schools to really get the essence of what the work was all about. Because I know they tell
Yeah.
you this is the work, but then
Mm-hmm.
there's the other part of the work you never told about. You have to
Yeah.
learn and find out on your own.
Yeah.
So I quickly learned that how do I connect with these young people that I need to attract back to the building on a regular basis?
Mm-hmm.
What got them disconnected from the school process?
Mm-hmm.
What did they need in order to come back into the school building?
Mm-hmm.
And then started talking to the teachers in the building. What role can they play? What do they need from me in bringing these students back into the building?
Right.
Then, of course, it wasn't immediate, but it became clear to me for me to do this, I need to let the
Mm-hmm.
parents know who I am, who's
Mm-hmm.
talking to their young people, who may eventually show up at their home, who may be calling their homes.
Mm-hmm.
Why should they trust me? Why should they want their kids to work with me, to talk to me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So all this started taking shape. First year was a struggle,
Yeah.
but my second and third year became so successful that the organization wanted me to step away from that school that I opened, that I set up, to
Mm-hmm.
go to another school that was having more challenges because
Yep.
they had a greater portfolio and more
Mm-hmm.
challenges and needed more support.
Yep.
Since what I did was being so effectively practiced in the school that they brought me to, they
Mm-hmm.
wanted me to go to that other school to support that effort. The
Mm-hmm.
principal got angry
Mm-hmm.
and told them if they took me away, she would drop the contract.
Mm-hmm.
So they brought me back.
Yeah, yeah.
But then a year later, they went to the
Mm-hmm.
superintendent of the entire
Mm-hmm.
region and says, no. In fact, his name is Noel Krishner. They said, no, Sonia refused to allow us to move Willair, but we need
Mm-hmm.
Willair to do other work based on what he's done
Mm-hmm.
at Eastern District.
Yeah.
And at the time, this is Kismet. At the time, there was going to go into a school that was in my neighborhood, Crown
Mm-hmm.
Heights, Wingate High School.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did then is, again, the growth continues there. They said, we want you to replicate what you did at Eastern District at Wingate.
Mm-hmm.
But I told them then, what do we know about Wingate? Because Eastern
Mm-hmm.
District was in Williamsburg, New York, in Bushwick.
Mm-hmm.
It was a school that had a mix of old kind of working class neighborhood of white kids, but
Mm-hmm.
also had a fair share of Black and Latino kids. And
Mm-hmm.
by the way, the Latino kids at the time were mostly Puerto Ricans.
Yep.
Dominicans had not moved into the neighborhood yet, but
Yep.
slowly creeping up, which
Yeah.
creates some of the dynamic cultural challenges that
Yeah.
existed. But Wingate
Absolutely.
was in Crown Heights,
Yeah.
totally different neighborhood. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I told them is we needed to do a scan. I didn't call it a scan, but I said we need to know the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But the reason I could do that is because at the time also I was an ANC. You call it
Mm-hmm.
ANC in DC, but
Yep.
in New York, call it Community Planning Board. So the fact
Mm-hmm.
that I was already in the Community Planning Board, I was chair of the Education and Library Committee, and the
Mm-hmm.
chair of that committee was someone who's still in New York City Assembly, Nick Perry. That's a whole other story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew what to do on how to evaluate the need of a school, how to also assess the challenge that exists in the neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
that is reflected in what's going on inside the school.
Mm-hmm.
Then, in talking to the principal, we can make a proposal of what we would do to achieve the outcome that they needed from the organization.
Yeah.
When they presented the plan to the principal, he's like, what's taking you guys so long? I need you guys
Mm-hmm.
last year, not this year.
Yeah.
And so quickly, I was embraced into the school, into the building.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing because my wife worked in the same school. So at some
Mm-hmm.
point, I was leading a program supporting young people while my wife was an English teacher in the same school.
Nice.
So then
Nice.
the work we did from that
Yeah.
point on became intertwined.
Nice.
And that's the way we still work, which is why we both consulting together
Yeah.
collaboratively because our work has always intersected. And
Mm-hmm.
so walking into Wingate High School, it was so successful from the very beginning. I
Mm-hmm.
started managing multiple schools in Brooklyn. And I
Nice.
started supporting other leaders who may have a challenge in their school on how to best support students, how to best connect with the resources in the community that students needed to be successful, how
Mm-hmm.
to communicate with the household, the parents, so they could understand the role they could play in supporting their young people.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember the cultural dynamic that existed with me and my parents.
Yeah.
I also started talking to young people from the Caribbean whose parents did not see there were three cultures that the young people were negotiating with: the
Mm-hmm.
culture at home,
Mm-hmm.
the culture at school, and the
Mm-hmm.
culture in the neighborhood.
Yep.
And so for a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old to negotiate those three cultures,
Mm-hmm.
it was overwhelming.
Yep.
So I needed to help parents to understand, yes, you have your boundaries, you have your discipline, you have your expectation of your children, but how do you help them to navigate those three worlds they live in? Yes,
Yes.
there are this Caribbean kid, wherever they're from, this immigrant kid, wherever they came from, at your house. But
Mm-hmm.
once they leave your house, they live in a world that's not like your house. That's
Yep.
not what it was back home.
Yeah.
How do they negotiate this safely, physically, mentally, emotionally? And
Mm-hmm.
then when they're walking to school, it is just another culture.
Yep.
So I was translating these factors to parents, to resources in the community, so young people could experience success. And in doing this, there are young people then who say, wait a minute, this guy truly cares.
Mm-hmm.
And so you met one of the young people who I connected to because through another project, in fact, she's going to
Yeah.
support the work that you do.
Yeah.
And she was not one of your people who was in need, but she was
Absolutely.
attracted to what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
One of her friends was in the program. And so
Yep.
she connected with me and we still stay connected. So,
Absolutely.
and that work led me to the place where I experienced the most growth in my career, United with New York City.
Yeah.
because this program that I've been mentioned to you, my first 6 years in working, was funded by New York State, and the
Mm-hmm.
money came straight to New York City Board of Ed.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, a decision was made that a third party should manage the entire program
Mm-hmm.
and then be responsible for how the program operated in the school. So United Way got the contract from New York State and needed to establish
Mm-hmm.
kind of a group of people who would manage this operation.
Yeah.
That program still exists in United Way of New York City to some extent now. And the acronym is CAPS, CAPS,
Mm-hmm.
Community Achievement Program in Schools.
Nice.
So Alexander Betancourt
Yeah.
made a presentation to a group of us that were working in the previous system, say, hey, we're going to take over the system. We want to learn from you as far as what worked, what did not work, and why. And
Mm-hmm.
what would you recommend that we do? Or what should we prioritize to make sure this works well? In
Mm-hmm.
that meeting, my colleagues who were sat with me said, hey, we have a question. And then I was the one who spoke. Said, so we've heard this before because that was a program every 2 years that had to be refunded by the state. What
Mm-hmm.
makes you different than what we've done?
Mm-hmm.
He said, do you want to hear my answer? I said, yes. He said, well, why don't you come with me to my office?
Yeah.
So he took him with me to his office on 99 Park Avenue, which
Uh-huh.
is on Park Avenue between 40th and 41st Street,
Mm-hmm.
United with New York City. We had a
Yep.
2 hour conversation.
Mm-hmm.
After the conversation, he said, that was an interview. I said, yeah, that was an interview. He said, yes, I want you to be part of my team.
Yeah.
So I was one of the first 4 people hired to lead this project at United Way. So I
Yeah.
left the nonprofit, moved to
Yeah.
United Way. And
Mm-hmm.
those next 5 years, Derek, shaped, structured the leader that I became.
Mm-hmm.
I learned from Alex Betancourt. I
Mm-hmm.
learned from Ralph Dickerson Jr., who passed away a few years ago. He was the
Mm-hmm.
president of United Way at the time. I learned from my peers that I work with and the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned through the work that we did in matching resources in the neighborhood with the local schools to create a web of support for young people to experience a positive educational journey and experience so they can grow and reach the outcome that they had for themselves, that the parents had for them. But
Yeah.
they could not do it alone.
Yep.
They had to have that web of support so that they will not fall into the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
Because unfortunately, we have so many systems that are disconnected that young people fall right through.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is create that web of support so
Yeah.
that a young person can feel supported and be supported.
Yeah.
And my professional growth, my maturity professionally,
Mm-hmm.
um, my confidence, my
Mm-hmm.
ability to negotiate system,
Yeah.
understand cultures,
Yeah.
grew exponentially in those 5 years at United Way.
Yeah.
And along the way, I met a resource. I have to mention his name, Alfonso Wyatt.
Mm-hmm.
Alfonso Wyatt, now he's Reverend Alfonso Wyatt.
Yeah.
If you're in New York City, you work with young people, you know Alfonso.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the elders, Alfonso about 10 years my elder, but we like
Yeah.
brothers, who welcomed me to the concept of networking. Because to
Mm-hmm.
do this, you have to network.
Yes.
No one has ever done what they've done
Mm-hmm.
alone.
Mm.
And so strategically networking,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to then use and leverage that network
Yep.
to help me navigate my professional and my
Yeah.
social
Yeah.
ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so that's my professional
Yeah. No,
experience.
man. Listen, I think you summed that up so beautifully, right? And what a great story, what a great trajectory. What really stood out to me, Willair, is, and this is selfishly what I want to ask you. I think in hindsight, looking back, you can see how prepared you were every step of the way. You know what I mean? From birth, right? From just the community you came out of in Haiti to your parents, your grandparents, everything. Like you were prepared for this. Your experience moving to America as a teenager, going through the challenges that you faced. I like to call them growing joys, not growing pains, because you embraced it, right? So I think looking back, I can see perfectly how you were prepared for this, right? But during the moment, as you're kind of making these steps, maybe you recognize, maybe you didn't recognize. But I think what I appreciate about you is like there's a le level of surrender and acceptance that you embody that just allows you to just be you. And that's what makes the difference.
Mhm.
So in hindsight, here's my question. Do you see it? And during the time, did you recognize what was happening professionally?
I did not.
Yeah.
I would say I recognized it right around 2012 and 13. I'll tell you why,
Mm.
but I didn't
Mm-hmm.
recognize it. I was fortunate. My wife is an educator,
Mm-hmm.
born and raised in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because of her, her parents, her father's still alive. That's like my second father. I call him dad, and we have that loving relationship from day one.
Mm-hmm.
The community that the two of us lived in
Mm-hmm.
was kind of a microcosm of what I would want my grandchildren to grow up in.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember the joke is when I leave work, especially when I was at United Way, I would turn the corner on Prospect Place, and all the elders, especially if it was April, May, or October, it's still a little chilly, but outside with the sun,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would have many mini conversations with these elders from the
Mm-hmm.
corner to the middle
Yep.
of the block where we live.
Yep.
And these were pleasant afternoon check-ins,
Yep.
kind of beautiful, kind of warming,
Yep.
heartwarming, real
Yep.
conversation, but little
Yep.
messages, little
Mm-hmm.
messages.
Mm-hmm.
One of the joke was I had a habit of at least every other Friday I bring flowers home. So as I'm
Mm-hmm.
turning the corner, there was a elder who says, it would call to my father-in-law. My father said, "Hey, this young man is making us look bad.
Yeah.
You got to spank him. You cannot keep doing this, bringing flowers home every
Yeah. Yeah.
Friday."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of little joke and jest is kind of the feel good. Next door to us on Prospect Place, there was this elder who was a dancer on Broadway. He was on
Mm.
Broadway as a young man dancer. By the way,
Mm-hmm.
he's the brother-in-law of Shirley Chisholm. The Shirley
Okay.
Chisholm family lived right next door to us on
Okay.
Prospect.
Mm-hmm.
He's the kind of elder that as I'm getting up at 7:30 to walk down the block and catch the number three to go to United Way, he was coming back from swimming in the morning
Yeah.
and staying healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Bacon would always have, again, that 5 minutes kind of interplay in the morning. It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
set my day. My wife and I, we set our day. She's going to teach. I'm going to United Way.
Yeah.
We have our vibe. We
Mm-hmm.
amazing. By the way, that's part of my blessing, having
Yeah.
the right partner in life.
Absolutely.
Number one, right?
Yep.
And that 5 minutes with Mr. Bacon coming going down the steps was like put a smile in my face. So nothing that day could take away what I walked away from in the morning.
Yeah.
And so all those little pieces,
Mm-hmm.
right, are significant. And
Yeah.
also with my wife coming back home, we
Yeah.
check in on her day, check in on my day, reflected on what worked well, what did not work well. And so there was always this continuous way of, okay, how is this working?
Mm-hmm.
And we both were able to take risk. I
Mm-hmm.
posted something online last 2 weekends ago. I do these messages to leaders every week,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I could tell them the sacrifice that my wife made
Mm-hmm.
when both of our sons were born. She stayed home for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in education, that takes a hit on her professionally, but she did it
Absolutely.
because it was best for her, it was best for the family.
Yep.
So taking this kind of risk is like, you know what? We can do this. We have enough
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. We have enough education. We have enough
Mm-hmm.
wherewithal. We have enough of a network to make things happen. So
Mm-hmm.
that confidence continued to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So when I left United Way in 1995, both Alex and wife says, Willair, we don't want you to go, but you do what's best for your family. You and
Yep.
Kobe decide to leave New York. We understand. So he's
Mm-hmm.
the severance pay. Here's a couple letters to take with you to Seattle so they know where you came from. They know they can
Right.
count on us for references.
Yep.
Go and prosper. And if you need
Mm-hmm.
us, we are here.
Gotcha.
Those little things, those little
Mm-hmm.
sign of confidence
Yeah.
that we believe in you, we trust you. They
Mm-hmm.
don't have to say we love you, but
Yeah.
sometimes someone say they love you, you question whether they do or not,
Mm-hmm.
but their action
Mm-hmm.
tells you that they did love you, they did support you.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
believe, although there were a lot of quote unquote negative and not so positive experiences, but those
Mm-hmm.
experiences were a lot louder, were a lot
Yeah.
more impactful. So,
Yeah.
in fact, my wife and this man were just talking, arriving in Seattle in 1995, whoa, that was kind of rough.
Yeah.
But because of who we are and the foundation that we came
Mm-hmm.
from,
Yep.
we're able to overcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I would say I may not have noticed it at the moment, but when we look back on our lives, we're like, you know
Hmm.
what? What we made of
Yeah.
is what helped us to be the person we are today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and this is crucial. The sense of community that you
Hmm.
experience, right? That
Hmm.
you're now hyper aware of, right? As you
Hmm.
reflect back, you can see, okay, these are the things that shaped me to be the person that I am. These are the
Hmm.
things that prepared me for the opportunities, the experiences that I had, right? And it gave me the best chance to do well and to succeed,
Hmm.
right? So having all this experience and knowing how valuable community is and how we can't do things by ourselves, how
Hmm.
did you as a parent and now as a grandparent, um, you know, how did you pass those lessons on and try to also intentionally and deliberately create the same sort of community that you experienced growing up for your kids
So
and grandkids?
so I would say it's harder.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder. But I would say by the way we live,
Mm-hmm.
we model it.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I would say when we moved to Seattle, for example, we intentionally created a community because we moved to Seattle with no family, no friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to create a community. So people that were colleagues of my wife at the university, people that I was colleague with at the Urban League or at the City of Seattle, or people we met in the neighborhood or we had similar kind of life experiences. We
Mm-hmm.
also met a few people that were from the East Coast. So
Mm-hmm.
we created a community. So our sons saw the community we created
Right.
and the value added there were to what we were doing. And by these people are still in our lives. We still have
Mm-hmm.
conversation with them. In fact, we just reflected that one of my wife's colleagues at the university, we didn't know that when we bought our condo, was a
Mm-hmm.
courtyard neighbor. She was right
Mm-hmm.
across the courtyard from us.
Okay.
And so whether it was intentional or through our own energy to the way we move to the vibe into who we are,
Mm-hmm.
we've been able to create community wherever we've landed. We did that in
Mm-hmm.
Seattle. We did that in DC.
Mm-hmm.
We've done that in Baltimore. And
Mm-hmm.
the work we do in Haiti and the work we do
Mm-hmm.
in Grenada and the work we're going to do
Yep.
wherever we're going to land,
Yep.
our always intention is to build community. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not always just for our benefit,
Mm-hmm.
it's to the benefit of the whole. We bring a certain energy, we bring certain value. We want to bring value. We don't want to
Yeah.
take away. We want to give more than we take away.
Absolutely.
So we
Absolutely.
model that.
Yeah.
And our sons have the same energy. Our sons are like magnets. Our oldest and
Yeah.
youngest, when they
Yeah.
step into the room, they are
Yeah.
magnet. People gravitate to them.
Mm-hmm.
They have that kind of energy. They have that kind of vibe and sense about them.
No, I love that. I love that. So we're gonna wrap this up, man. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I could talk to you for hours, and I know it's always just a joy just speaking to you. So my final question for you is, what is your North Star? Right? So what's the your personal philosophy that kind of guides you, that reminds you to stay grounded?
So a couple of things. It sounds almost
Mm-hmm.
boring. There's a video, Derek, I would want you to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Cornel West has a 2 minute video to kind of market and introduce his masterclass.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah.
And there's a part at the end, it says, what is it like to be in the skin of others around the
Mm.
globe?
Mm-hmm.
So we often talk about being global citizens, but we don't live
Yeah.
that way,
Nice.
right? We don't live that way.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons why my wife and I we can do what we do is because wherever we go, we show up with respect, with integrity
Mm-hmm.
to be in community. And so that's what we are doing now. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we always want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we show up, we are well received most of the time because
Yeah.
people see who we are and our intention,
Mm-hmm.
our whys, right? We have
Yeah.
that why we exist,
Yeah.
why we do what we do.
Absolutely. No, I think
So
that's beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Thank you, everyone. Willair Saintville. Thank you, Willair. I appreciate you, man. I love you. Thank you for everything that you've done for me. All the words of wisdom, sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to have this conversation.
Absolutely, man.